The sound hit before anyone could process it, not the beep of a monitor, not the clatter of a dropped instrument tray. It was the flat, sharp crack of an open palm meeting a human face, the kind of sound that doesn't belong in a hospital, the kind that freezes a room the way a gunshot freezes a street. 23 people in the emergency department of Mercy General Medical Center stopped what they were doing at exactly 7:42 a.m. on a Tuesday in October. Dahlia didn't fall. That was the first thing anyone would remember afterward. Not the sound, not the man who made it, but the fact that she didn't fall. She was small, maybe 5'4", wearing navy scrubs that were a size too large. Her dark hair pulled back in a low knot so plain it bordered on institutional. She had been standing at bed 7, wrapping a compression bandage around the left forearm of a 60-year-old contractor named Pete, who had sliced himself on a cabinet edge at his job site. The bandage technique was unusual, a modified pressure wrap with diagonal cross-tension, but no one had been paying enough attention to notice. Harrison Kingsley had noticed. Or rather, he had noticed that it wasn't the technique described in Mercy General's standardized nursing protocol binder, which he had personally commissioned a consulting firm to produce at a cost of $47,000 2 years ago. And Harrison Kingsley did not pay $47,000 to be ignored by a contract nurse whose name he had never bothered to learn. "That is not the approved method," he said. His voice was smooth, calibrated, the voice of a man who had spent decades making rooms go quiet on command. He was 61, silver-haired, built like someone who had once been athletic and had since traded muscle for authority. His suit was charcoal Italian wool. His 3 guests, 2 men and a woman in business attire, all wearing the careful smiles of people who were being pitched at, stood just behind him, like a tailored shadow. Dahlia looked up. She didn't apologize. She didn't explain. She simply looked at him with dark, steady eyes, and then looked back down at her patient's arm and continued wrapping. The room collectively held its breath. Kingsley stepped forward, 1 step, 2, until he was close enough that she could have counted the threads in his lapel. "I'm speaking to you." He pulled the clipboard from her hands with the casual ease of someone who had never once considered that the object might not belong to him. "Sir," she said, and her voice was quiet, almost toneless. "The patient has lateral compartment pressure buildup. Standard protocol wrapping increases distal ischemia risk in this presentation." Kingsley stared at her. The clipboard hung in his hand. Something flickered behind his eyes. Not uncertainty, not quite, but the brief electrical impulse of a man who has just been spoken to in a language he didn't expect from a source he had already dismissed. Then he set the clipboard down on the supply cart beside him, straightened his jacket, and looked at the 3 people standing behind him with an expression that managed to be both apologetic and contemptuous at once. "This," he said pleasantly, "is precisely the problem I was describing on the way up. We bring in contract staff with no investment in our standards, no accountability to our systems. The wrap is correct for this patient," Dahlia said, still quiet, still not looking at him. The slap came without warning. 1 motion, his right hand. The sound was flat and hard and wrong in every possible way that a sound could be wrong, inside a place that existed to heal people. Pete, the contractor, flinched back against his pillow. Holly, a 24-year-old nurse 3 beds down, made a sound that wasn't quite a word. Caleb, a 15-year veteran in his 50s who had seen a considerable amount in his career, went very still. Dahlia's head turned with the impact. A strand of hair came loose from her knot. She stood there for a moment, 1 second, 2, with her face angled slightly to the left, looking at nothing. Then she slowly turned back. She didn't touch her face. She didn't look at Kingsley with tears or rage or the particular expression of someone calculating their next move. She looked at him the way you might look at a weather forecast, registering information, nothing more. "Get out," Kingsley said, and his voice had dropped to something quieter and more dangerous than before. "Get out of my hospital, and if I see you in this building again, I'll have security remove you." The room was silent. 23 people, none of them speaking, none of them moving, all of them breathing very carefully. Dahlia reached for the compression bandage, still unfinished, and set it precisely on the supply tray beside Pete's bed. She picked up her badge from the counter where she'd laid it during the wrap. She turned and walked toward the department doors without hurrying. She didn't look back. The doors swung shut behind her. Kingsley smoothed his jacket again, turned to his guests and said, Now, shall we continue the tour? As if a thermostat had been adjusted and nothing more. Holly stood frozen beside a medication cart with her hand still half raised. Caleb had looked back down at his patient chart. Carter, the charge nurse supervisor, a compact man in his early 40s whose loyalty to Kingsley was the open secret of the floor, allowed himself a small, satisfied exhale and picked up his radio. Nobody in that room knew that in 47 minutes, every single one of them would wish they had spoken. But the thing about 47 minutes is that it passes whether you want it to or not. The hallway outside the emergency department had the particular fluorescent blankness of hospital corridors everywhere, a light that flattened everything and hid nothing. Dahlia walked through it without changing her pace, turned left at the fire door, and stopped in the alcove beside the linen supply room where the camera angle was blind. She stood there for approximately 3 seconds. Then she inhaled, slow, controlled, the kind of breath that doesn't begin in the chest, and exhaled through her nose. Her hands were steady at her sides. If you were watching her face for a reaction, you would have found almost nothing. A faint tension along the jaw, a quality of alertness that was oddly inconsistent with the situation, because most people who have just been struck in the face look shaken, and Dahlia looked focused. She checked her watch, 7:44 a.m. She had 6 weeks of recorded data in a device the size of a thumb drive, currently secured inside a medication tray she had left in an unlocked cabinet on the 3rd floor 20 minutes ago. She had a contact who was expecting a status update at 0800 hours. She had a timeline, and the timeline had not budged. She pulled her hair back into its knot, tucked the loose strand, and walked toward the patient ward. But Holly found her in the supply closet at 7:58 a.m. refilling the gauze cart. "I'm so sorry." Holly's voice came out too high, too fast, with the particular quality of someone apologizing for something they feel complicit in. She was 24 and had been working at Mercy General for 11 months, and she still believed, in the specific way that young nurses believe, that hospitals are fundamentally places of decency. Nobody should have, I should have said something. He was standing right there, and the investors were all watching, and It's all right, Dahlia said. "It's not all right. It's really not all right." "I know." Dahlia set a roll of gauze on the shelf with precise alignment. "But you did nothing wrong, Holly." Holly opened her mouth and then closed it, because something in the way Dahlia said it, not reassuring, not dismissive, just flat and certain, like a statement of operational fact, made further argument feel somehow beside the point. She watched Dahlia straighten 2 more items on the shelf with a specific, unconscious economy of movement, every adjustment landing exactly where it was needed without any searching or correction. The kind of efficiency you only develop through years of working in spaces where precision was not optional. Holly left. She wasn't sure why, but the feeling that stayed with her was not quite sympathy. It was something closer to the unsettled awareness of having stood in a room that was larger than it appeared. Caleb found her at 8:12 a.m. He didn't approach immediately. He had spent 15 years in nursing, the last 8 at Mercy General. And before that, he had spent time in places he didn't discuss, except occasionally when a patient came in with a particular kind of wound pattern or a particular kind of silence that recognized itself. He stood at the end of the corridor near the break room and watched Dahlia push the medication cart toward the patient ward with her head down and her pace steady. When she passed within 6 feet of him, he said, very quietly, "Bravo, Mike." 10 years? She didn't stop walking. She didn't turn her head. The cart kept moving at the same speed, but her right hand, which had been resting on the cart's push bar, shifted almost imperceptibly, the edge of her index finger tapping once, twice, against the metal frame. A rhythm that wasn't accidental. Caleb watched her continue down the hall. He turned back to the break room and poured himself a cup of coffee that he didn't drink, and stood there with a thoughtful expression that was not quite recognition and not quite confirmation, but somewhere between them in the space where veterans store the things they know without being able to prove. At 8:20 a.m., Carter found Dahlia at the nursing station and handed her a printed form with the particular satisfaction of someone delivering a punishment they have been authorized to impose. "Building services request," he said. "Basement storage reorganization, Unit B. You're on it until noon." Dahlia took the form, looked at it briefly, Understood. Good. Carter smiled, which did not improve his face. Consider it a lateral reassignment. Mr. Kingsley wants you out of patient-facing areas for the remainder of the day while your contract review is processed. What review? The one that determines whether you're retained. He took back the clipboard and tucked it under his arm. You understand. Performance concerns. He walked away. Dahlia folded the form once along its center crease, precisely without any wasted motion, and went to find the elevator. In the basement, the storage units were a maze of aging metal shelving, cardboard boxes, and the accumulated physical history of a hospital that had been operating for 31 years. The task she'd been assigned was real, in the way that pointless punishments are real. There was indeed inventory to reorganize, and it was indeed tedious, and Carter had indeed structured it to waste exactly the hours he most wanted her out of sight. What Carter hadn't accounted for was the way Dahlia moved through the space. She assessed the room in approximately 8 seconds, ceiling height, shelving load distribution, floor plan logic, the most efficient path sequence. Then she started. The boxes she moved correctly. Knees, not back, load centered against her body. And she moved them with a particular kind of controlled force that suggested the 80-pound box she lifted, without any visible struggle, was not the heaviest thing she had ever carried in difficult circumstances. She rearranged the shelving configuration with the particular spatial logic of someone who had thought seriously, at some point in her life, about what you put where, when you might need to reach it quickly, in the dark under pressure. By 9:15, she had reorganized a space that would have taken a standard facilities crew 4 hours. She stood in the center of it, looked around once, and went upstairs. Before we go further, if you're new here, hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell right now, because what this quiet little nurse is about to do in the next 30 minutes will make your jaw drop. The people in that ER think they just watched someone get humiliated. They have no idea they're about to witness something that will change every single one of them forever. Don't miss what comes next. The patient in bed 12 of the general ward was named Ezra. He was 68 years old, a former Army infantryman who had served 2 tours in Vietnam and 1 in the Gulf, and who had the particular quality of stillness that some veterans develop. Not peace, exactly, but the practiced ability to occupy a space without requiring anything from it. He had no family listed on his intake form. He had a knee replacement scheduled for the following morning, and a roommate who watched game shows at high volume, and whom he had not spoken to in the 2 days since his admission. Dahlia stopped at his bedside to check his pre-op chart at 9:22 a.m. She flipped through the pages, noted 2 medication interactions that weren't flagged, made a notation, and was about to move on when he said, without opening his eyes, "You're moving quieter than usual." She paused. "You notice that?" "Always notice." He opened his eyes, pale blue, clear despite his age. "Doc moved like that. My field doc, 1968. Never heard him coming either." He looked at her more carefully. "Sorry. I know you're a nurse." "It's all right," she said for the 2nd time that morning. But this time, something in her expression shifted. Not much, just a fraction, the way a door opens inward by a few inches and then stops. She looked at the medication interaction she'd noted, and then at the man who had spotted her the way veterans spot each other sometimes, across categories and decades and every disguise that time and circumstance can apply. "Your chart shows they're giving you metoprolol and verapamil concurrently before surgery," she said. "That combination puts pressure on your cardiac conduction system under general anesthesia. I'm going to flag it for your surgical team." Ezra studied her. "Most nurses don't catch that," he said. "Most people don't catch a lot of things," she said, and moved to the next chart. He watched her go. After a moment, he settled back against his pillow and said to himself quietly the word he had accidentally used before, "Doc," and did not correct it. Soak. At 9:47, Kingsley led his 3 investors through the pediatric ward with the confidence of a man who had memorized his own sales deck. The investors were Fiona, a sharp-eyed woman in her 50s who ran a healthcare equity fund out of Philadelphia, and 2 men named Russell and Grant who asked good questions and wrote down the answers with fountain pens. Blaine moved alongside Kingsley with the synchronized smoothness of a second shadow, fielding the technical questions, redirecting the uncomfortable ones, deploying numbers with the practiced ease of someone who had spent considerable time deciding which numbers to deploy. Our surgical outcomes data, Blaine was saying, sliding a tablet toward Fiona, reflects a 15% improvement over the regional benchmark for comparable institutions. Complication rates? Fiona asked. Trending favorably. We've implemented new post-operative monitoring protocols that... I'd like to see the raw numbers, Blaine smiled. Of course. We'll have the full data package to you by end of week. They moved past the window of the pediatric procedure room. Inside, a child of about 7 was getting a cast fitted, while a nurse held his hand, and a resident explained the process in the careful language adults use to make frightening things sound manageable. The physical plant is our biggest current opportunity, Kingsley said smoothly, steering attention back to the hallway. We're in the second phase of a capital improvement program that will bring this facility fully in line with contemporary standards while reducing our nursing overhead by approximately 30% through strategic contract restructuring. Fiona wrote something down. Grant nodded. Russell looked out the window at the pediatric room. What none of them saw, because she was behind them, pushing a supply cart at exactly the right speed to maintain a 7-foot distance, was Dahlia, moving through the pediatric corridor. Listening, not looking at them, not slowing down, not changing anything about her pace or her posture or the direction of her gaze, just absorbing every word with the practiced attention of someone trained to retain information without appearing to collect it. The cart turned a corner, and she was gone. Machete. At 10:15, a call came over the department intercom. Motor vehicle accident, multiple casualties, estimated arrival in 12 minutes, 3 units inbound. Aaron. Doctor. Aaron Mercer, 29 years old, 4 months into his emergency medicine residency, perpetually slightly behind where he expected himself to be. Looked at the board, looked at his patient census, and felt the particular stomach drop sensation of someone who has been in the water for a while and just noticed the current getting faster. He started moving through the department, pulling staff, checking bed availability. The charge desk was short, 2 nurses, one on break, one pulled to a code on the 3rd floor. Carter was on his radio. The attending who was supposed to be supervising was currently on a call with hospital administration about something related to a contract review. Dahlia was standing at the edge of the department. She was technically not authorized to be there. Carter's instruction this morning had been explicit. But she was there, near the entrance, very still, watching Aaron work through the pre-arrival checklist with the focused observation of someone running a parallel calculation in their head. Holly noticed her. You're not supposed to be... How many are coming? Dahlia asked. 3 units. They're saying 4 confirmed critical, 1 probable. Dahlia looked at the board, looked at the available staff, looked at the bed configuration. The calculation took approximately 4 seconds. Bed 3 needs to clear, she said. The patient in 3 is stable and can move to OBS. You need the trauma bay for the head injury that's coming. The initial report says mechanism of injury is consistent with rotational cranial impact. So you're going to want room to intubate and CT prep simultaneously. She paused. And someone needs to call the OR suite and tell them to hold elective cases for the next 90 minutes. Holly stared at her. How do you know? I heard the call. The mechanism data is in the pre-arrival report. Aaron had appeared behind Holly. He had heard enough. Can you help? Carter's voice cut across the department from the charge desk. She's not authorized in this area. I know, Aaron said, not looking at Carter. He looked at Dahlia. Can you help? Dahlia stepped through the door. The first unit arrived at 10:27, the second at 10:29. By the time the 3rd unit pulled in, Dahlia had already cleared bed 3, flagged the OR suite, positioned 2 nurses at the intake points, and stood beside Aaron at the trauma bay entrance with the calm, undemonstrative readiness of someone who had done this before in conditions that made a suburban emergency department look like a quiet afternoon. The critical patients came in fast and complicated and overlapping, the way critical patients always do. And what happened in the next 18 minutes was not dramatic in the way that television emergency departments are dramatic. It was the opposite. It was dense and technical and precise, and the drama of it was entirely in what didn't happen. Nobody went into cardiac arrest on the table. Nobody's airway was lost. Nobody got the wrong intervention for the wrong presentation. The patient in the first unit had a head injury with the particular constellation of symptoms: unequal pupils, right-side neglect, specific reflex pattern that pointed to a subdural bleed requiring immediate surgical consult. Aaron was moving toward a standard concussion protocol when Dahlia appeared at his left shoulder, not touching anything, and said very quietly, "Check the pupils again. Left is blown." He checked. She was right. He called the surgical consult. The patient in the second unit had an abdomen that looked clean on initial assessment. Dahlia was across the bay, but she glanced over twice in the first 90 seconds, and on the third glance she said from 6 feet away, "A guarding on the left lower quadrant. Ask about recent abdominal surgery." The patient had a mesh repair 3 months prior. The trauma had disrupted it. It would have been missed on the initial scan if someone hadn't been looking for it. Nobody said anything about this out loud while it was happening, because there wasn't time. And in high acuity situations, people who are working don't stop to discuss where the help is coming from. You just receive it and keep moving. By 10:45, all 5 patients were stabilized and routed. The department exhaled collectively. Aaron stood at the sink washing his hands and stared at the drain for a long moment. Dahlia was already gone. She had walked out the same way she came in, without announcement, without transition, without a word to anyone. And when Carter arrived at 10:48 to tell Aaron that the unauthorized contract nurse needed to be formally removed from the premises immediately, Aaron looked at him for a moment, and then looked back at his patient board and said, "Give me a minute," in a tone that indicated the minute might be somewhat longer than 60 seconds. Mashag Carter's response over the next hour was the kind of institutional retaliation that doesn't technically break any rules because it never quite becomes a single definable act. He told the nursing staff casually in the break room while refilling his coffee that the new contract nurse's credentials had come into question. Something about her original training records not aligning with her application. Something about a nursing school in Eastern Europe that hadn't responded to verification requests. He wasn't making accusations, he said, just flagging it as something people should be aware of. The information moved the way information moves in institutions, faster than facts, slower than rumors, in a form that was too vague to challenge and too specific to ignore. Holly heard it at 11:15. She was standing at the medication cart and she heard it, and she looked at Dahlia across the department with an expression that had changed. Not hostility, but the kind of cautious recalibration that people do when they realize they might have been trusting the wrong things. Dahlia noticed. She always noticed. She continued with what she was doing, which was recording a blood pressure reading for a patient in bed 11, and she didn't look up again. At 11:40 a.m., Btch, a man in his mid-50s walked through the main entrance of Mercy General in civilian clothes. Khaki pants, a button-down shirt, the particular kind of plane that is actually carefully assembled, and went to the visitor desk to ask for the room number of his nephew, who was recovering from an appendectomy on the 4th floor. His name was Jasper Holt. His rank was Colonel, United States Army, currently stationed at Fort Carlisle, 6 miles east. He had been in uniform for 31 years, and he was built like it. Straight-spined, wide-shouldered, with a face that had been weathered by the specific combination of outdoor light and sustained responsibility that ages a person differently than ordinary time. He got his nephew's room number and took the elevator to the 4th floor and spent 20 minutes visiting, which mostly consisted of his nephew complaining about the food and Jasper listening with the practiced patience of someone who has sat through a great deal of complaining in much worse conditions. On his way back to the elevator at 12:15 p.m., he passed through the 3rd floor corridor. He was not looking for anything in particular. He was thinking about a meeting he had at 1400 hours and whether he had time to stop for lunch. He saw Dahlia from behind. She was pushing a linen cart toward the supply room, and there was nothing about the image that should have registered at all. Small woman, navy scrubs, plain hair, institutional posture. But something made Jasper stop. Not a conscious recognition, more like the involuntary arrest of movement that happens when the body identifies something before the mind has caught up with it. He stood in the corridor for a moment, watching her move. The way she held her shoulders, the way her feet placed themselves on the floor, with a specific heel-to-toe weight distribution that was not a nurse's walk and not a civilian's walk. The way she paused at the supply room door, assessed the interior, and entered. That pause, that assessment, a fraction of a second, barely visible, but it was there. Jasper continued to the elevator. He pressed the button. He stood there. When the doors opened, he didn't get in. He turned around and walked back to the 3rd floor nursing station, where he asked the ward clerk, in the pleasant, uncomplicated manner of a visitor, whether the nurse with the dark hair who had just gone into the supply room was on the regular staff. The ward clerk said she was a contract nurse, fairly new, and left it at that. Jasper took the elevator down. He got into his car in the parking lot. He sat there for a moment with his hands on the wheel, and then he reached for his radio. "Fort Carlisle Dispatch," he said. "This is Colonel Holt. I need a priority database inquiry. Female, approximately mid-30s, 5 feet 4, dark hair. Cross-reference against JSOC personnel records and any classified deployment rosters that include Fort Carson between 2014 and 2019. Authorization code Foxtrot 7 Hotel." He paused, "and run the name Dahlia through the same search, all variants." He put the car in drive and sat in the parking lot with the engine running. In the third-floor supply room, Dahlia had located the specific medication tray she had left in the unlocked cabinet 3 hours earlier. She opened the tray, retrieved a small rectangular device from beneath the second layer of gauze rolls, and checked its status indicator. Green, recording continuously. 18 hours of material. She replaced the tray, closed the cabinet, checked her watch. 12:21 p.m. She pulled out a secondary phone, not her personal one, and typed a short message in a notation system that would have looked like a filing code to anyone who happened to see it. "Phase 2 confirm. Need 48 hours. Contact Bravo." She sent the message, deleted it, replaced the phone in her inner pocket. She stood in the supply room for a moment, alone in the particular quality of silence that exists in institutional spaces when the machinery stops for a second. The fluorescent light hummed. Somewhere in the distance, a monitor beeped in its steady, indifferent rhythm. Dahlia picked up the linen cart and continued her route. What? At 12:53 p.m., Kingsley was in his office on the 6th floor, conducting what he called a strategic alignment session, and what was actually a meeting in which he told people what he had decided while creating the impression that they had participated in the decision. Blaine sat to his right. The hospital's legal counsel, a careful man named Levi, sat across the table reviewing a document that appeared to relate to contract modifications. 2 members of the board of directors who had been invited for what they'd been told was a routine operations update were slowly realizing it was not quite that. "The nursing contract restructure," Kingsley said, "is the centerpiece of our operational optimization for next fiscal year. We're looking at reducing our direct nursing headcount by 31% and shifting to a managed contract model through our preferred staffing partnership." One of the board members, an older woman named Margaret, who had been on the board for 9 years and had seen several of Kingsley's preferred partnerships before, said, "What are the liability implications of that model for patient outcomes?" Kingsley looked at Levi. Levi said something about regulatory compliance and baseline safety ratios. Margaret wrote something down. "There's also the matter," Blaine added smoothly, "of the equipment renewal contract with Stratford Medical Systems. We're in the final stage of negotiating a 10-year supply agreement that will standardize our device procurement across all 4 facilities." Fiona, who had joined the session after the morning tour, looked up from her tablet. "Stratford Medical Systems has a Department of Defense contract, correct?" "They're a registered defense contractor, yes," Blaine said, "which actually strengthens their supply chain reliability." "Their liability documentation," Fiona said, "includes a 2-year-old product recall on their hemodynamic monitoring equipment that their legal team classified as a voluntary improvement. 11 hospitals reported adverse events. 3 of them were facilities that Mercy General has sourcing relationships with." The room was quiet for a moment. Kingsley said, "I wasn't aware you'd reviewed their documentation." "I reviewed it this morning," Fiona said, "after the tour." She set her tablet down. "I'd like to see the internal evaluation Mercy General conducted before entering contract discussions." What nobody at that table knew, because nobody in that room was looking for it, was that the evaluation document Fiona was requesting did not actually exist in the form she expected, and that the adverse events she had mentioned from those 3 affiliate hospitals were not actually 3, they were 11, and that the difference between those 2 numbers represented the specific discrepancy that Dahlia had been sent to Mercy General to document. At 1:12 p.m., the second major trauma call of the day came in. This one was different. A military transport vehicle from Fort Carlisle had been involved in a collision with a civilian truck on the highway 6 miles east. 5 injured, 3 critical. The unit, arriving in 8 minutes, had a preliminary report that included an injury pattern description that most civilian emergency departments would process as standard blunt force trauma and treat accordingly. Dahlia heard the call from the third-floor corridor. She was not supposed to be on the patient-facing floors. She looked at the clock. She looked at the stairwell door. She went down the stairs at a pace that was not quite a run. In the emergency department, Aaron was already moving, already pulling the team together, already running the prep checklist with the practiced efficiency he'd developed over the past 5 months of residency. He had learned, in those 5 months, to be good under pressure. He had not yet learned, because there are things experience cannot fully teach until you've seen them, to identify the specific injury signatures of high-velocity military vehicle impacts. Dahlia came through the department doors at 1:14 p.m., 2 minutes before the first unit arrived. Carter saw her and opened his mouth. "Not now," Aaron said without looking at Carter. The first patient came in at 1:16, the second at 1:18. By the time the third arrived, Dahlia had positioned herself at the secondary bay with Holly and a respiratory technician named Marcos, and she had begun working with the particular focused silence of someone who has decided that explanations are a post-situation luxury. The third patient, a young private, maybe 21 years old, who had been in the back of the transport vehicle, had a wound pattern that Dahlia recognized in under 4 seconds. The mechanism, the specific distribution of injury, the way he was protecting his left side without being fully conscious of it. She had seen this before, in conditions and in locations that did not appear on any nursing school curriculum. "Left side blast over pressure pattern," she said to Aaron quietly from 2 feet away. "Check his tympanic membranes and his pulmonary fields before you touch the visible injuries. The visible presentation is secondary." Aaron looked at her. He looked at the patient. He did what she said. The pulmonary contusion was bilateral and significant. It would have been masked by the more dramatic surface presentation for another 12 to 15 minutes. Long enough for a well-intentioned standard intervention to worsen it materially. He caught it, because she told him where to look. The next 14 minutes were dense and technical and produced the result that they needed to produce. 5 patients, 5 stabilized outcomes, no loss of airway, no missed critical pathway. When the last patient was settled and the department breathing again, Aaron found himself standing at the trauma bay entrance looking at Dahlia, who was writing a note on a form she had no official authorization to be completing, with the specific handwriting of someone who had written a great deal in field conditions. Compact, precise, every character formed with economical clarity. "Where did you train?" he asked. She finished the notation, set the pen down. "It was a long time ago," she said. "The pulmonary contusion notes are on the chart. You'll want to flag it for your attending." She walked out. Aaron stood there. Holly appeared at his shoulder and said very quietly, as if she were telling him something she wasn't fully comfortable knowing. "She knew the military vehicle injury pattern before they told us what kind of vehicle it was." Aaron said nothing for a moment. Then, "I know." Btch Carter's response this time was not casual break-room conversation. He went directly to the 6th floor. He knocked on Kingsley's office door, entered without being invited, and said, "The contract nurse is back in the department. I have it on record that she was explicitly removed from patient-facing areas, and she's been in there twice this afternoon running unauthorized interventions." Kingsley looked up from a document he was reviewing with Levi. His expression did something small and cold. "What's her contract status?" "Technically still active until the review board meets, which isn't until next week. Accelerated. Sir, if we process termination before the review board—" "I didn't say terminate. I said accelerate." Kingsley looked back at his document and pulled her access badge. "If she can't get through the security doors, we don't have to argue about where she is." Blaine, who was at the window looking at the parking lot, said without turning, "Her paperwork may be the issue anyway. I had legal look into it this morning. Her training documentation has some irregularities. Eastern European institution, possible credential discrepancy." Levi looked up briefly. "Do you want me to initiate a formal credential inquiry?" "Start the process," Kingsley said, "and get immigration services on the phone. I want to understand what our options are." Carter left the room and took the elevator back down. He did not notice, as he passed the 3rd-floor corridor on his way to the department, the door of the supply room opening behind him. He did not see Iris, Dr. Iris Kwan, head of emergency medicine, who had for 6 weeks managed the careful, bureaucratic performance of being head of a department without appearing to be complicit in anything, reach out and pull that supply room door closed with the deliberate care of someone who had been standing on the other side of it for approximately the past 4 minutes. "Dr. Mashi's still with us?" "Good. Because what just happened is only half the story. The real question isn't what Dahlia can do. The question is why she's been hiding it all this time, and the answer is going to hit harder than anything you've seen so far. Subscribe if you haven't, and make sure your notifications are on. The next 10 minutes are the ones you came here for. At 2:48 p.m., Iris found Dahlia in the small office off the medication room that the charge nurses used for documentation. Dahlia was filling out a patient observation log. Iris closed the door behind her, sat down across the desk, and for a moment neither of them said anything. "Colonel Holt called the department line 40 minutes ago," Iris said. Dahlia continued writing. "He didn't ask for you by name," Iris said. "He asked for the head of emergency medicine, and he said he was making a routine inquiry about a contract staff member. He was very professional about it." "He's good at professional," Dahlia said. "He identified himself, his rank, his unit." Dahlia set the pen down. She looked at Iris with the same level, diagnostic quality of attention she had been deploying all day on things that were not people. "What did you tell him?" "That the staff member in question was a routine contract hire whose background was being reviewed by administration." Iris paused. "He said, 'Thank you,' and hung up." The two women sat with that for a moment. "He recognized me," Dahlia said. "It wasn't a question. He would have, wouldn't he? He served with the unit before my deployment. He's seen the briefing materials." She picked up the pen again, then set it back down. "It complicates the next 48 hours. How much?" "I needed Kingsley to make his move on the Stratford contract before we had enough to close the financial chain. If Holt makes contact with the base intelligence office before I'm ready." She stopped, recalculated. It might actually work. Iris looked at her. "You're adjusting in real time." "That's the job." Iris stood. At the door, she paused with her hand on the handle and said, "Carter is moving to pull your access badge. Effective end of shift." "I know. You have until 5 p.m. "I know." Dahlia looked at the patient log she had been completing. "I need you to do something." "What?" "The security cameras in the emergency department. Routine maintenance cycle. Schedule it for 4:30 to 5:30 p.m. Iris studied her for a moment. "Routine maintenance," she said. "Yes." Iris left. Dahlia picked up the pen, finished the notation she had been writing, and placed the log in the outgoing documentation tray with absolute precision along its left edge. At 3:17 p.m., Seth Pryor, a local journalist who had been covering the healthcare industry for 7 years, and who had developed in that time a specific radar for the gap between institutional narrative and institutional reality, arrived at the hospital carrying a recorder and a press badge and the studied casualness of someone who has learned that the best way to gather information is to look like you're gathering different information. He had come to write a piece about the hospital's community health outreach program, which was generating positive press coverage, and which he suspected was serving, at least partially, as a reputational offset for something he hadn't yet identified. He introduced himself to the public relations coordinator on the first floor, accepted a cup of coffee, and settled in for what he fully expected to be a long afternoon of receiving information that was carefully true. He ran into Caleb in the cafeteria at 3:45 by what was not entirely coincidence. Seth had a network of sources in the city's healthcare system, and one of them had mentioned Caleb's name in the context of people who have been at Mercy General long enough to know where things actually are. They sat across from each other with trays of food that neither of them were particularly interested in, and Seth said, after some warm-up conversation, "There's been some interesting personnel activity in the ED lately. Anything you want to share off the record?" Caleb considered his coffee cup for a moment. "Off the record," he said, "there's a lot happening in this building that has nothing to do with the community health program." "Such as?" "Such as contracts." Caleb set down his cup. "Specifically the kind that benefit from keeping certain information out of the public record." Seth leaned forward slightly. "Stratford Medical Systems?" Caleb looked at him. "You've been doing your homework." "Trying to." "Don't follow the nurse," Caleb said, and his voice had changed. Flatter, more careful. The voice of someone choosing words like footsteps on uncertain ground. "Whatever you think is the story there, it isn't. Follow the money instead. Specifically, the equipment procurement records from the last 2 years, and why the adverse event log doesn't match what's being reported to the state health board." Seth wrote something. "And the nurse?" Caleb stood, picking up his tray. "That story writes itself," he said. "When it's ready. Not yet." He walked away. Seth sat alone in the cafeteria with his notebook and the distinct feeling of someone who has just been handed a thread and told, in the clearest possible terms, to pull it. At 4:03 p.m., Dahlia was in the east corridor of the third floor when she heard, through the closed door of the conference room adjacent to the nursing station, Kingsley's voice. She was supposed to be completing her medication documentation before her badge access was revoked. She had 11 minutes of useful time remaining. She looked at the conference room door, and then she did something that was not on her schedule. She slowed down. Slightly. Enough. "The board won't be an issue," Kingsley was saying. "Margaret asks questions, but she doesn't push. The Stratford Agreement goes through at the end of the month, regardless of what Fiona thinks she found." Blaine's voice. "She's sharp. If she keeps looking, she won't keep looking if she doesn't have anything to look at." A pause. "Levi, what's the status on the documentation archiving?" Levi's voice, more cautious. "The digitization process creates some exposure. If someone with the right access were to request the original intake logs from the adverse event reports." "Nobody with the right access is going to do that," Kingsley said. "That's why we structured access the way we did." Dahlia had heard enough. She continued walking. In the supply room at the end of the corridor, she retrieved the small recording device from its position in the medication tray and confirmed its status. Green recording 14 hours of continuous material across the past 6 weeks, including the last 45 seconds. She replaced it, locked the cabinet, left the supply room. At 4:11 p.m. she was in the basement, and the small phone in her inner pocket received a message that consisted of 4 words and a number. "Phase 3. Bravo confirmed. 0700. She read it, deleted it, put the phone away. Put the Satakiji thoughts. Somewhere above her, a helicopter that she was not expecting for another 16 hours was adjusting its flight plan. She didn't know that yet. She walked to the elevator, pressed the button for the ground floor, and watched the numbers count down with the expression of someone who has done everything they needed to do today and is now waiting for the next thing to begin. The elevator opened. She stepped in. The doors closed. The elevator doors opened on the ground floor, and Dahlia stepped out into the main corridor at 4:13 p.m. The hospital was in its late afternoon rhythm. The shift change beginning to build at the edges. Visitors moving toward the exits, the cafeteria starting its dinner prep with the particular institutional smell of reheated protein and industrial cleaning solution. She walked through it with the same unhurried, unremarkable pace she had maintained for 6 weeks, and nobody looked at her because she had spent 6 weeks ensuring that nobody looked at her. She was heading toward the nursing documentation office to complete her final chart entries before her badge access was revoked at 5 p.m., when her phone, her personal one, not the secure line, vibrated once. A text from a number saved under a contact name she had chosen carefully for its absolute plausibility. In a nurse's contact list, Dr. R. Coleman. Scheduling. The message read, "Patient transfer delayed. Arrival now, 4:45. She read it, put the phone away, adjusted her timeline by 32 minutes, absorbed the adjustment, and continued walking. 4:45. That changed things, not by much, but in operations where the variables were human beings and institutional inertia, and the unpredictable behavior of men who believed they were untouchable, 32 minutes was the difference between a controlled conclusion and an improvised one. She had been trained in both. She preferred the former. She would adapt to the latter if necessary. She turned down the east corridor and began her final documentation. Floyd Briggs had been head of security at Mercy General for 9 years, and he was good at his job in the specific way that people are good at jobs that require physical presence and procedural certainty, and not very much ambiguity. He was 44, broad through the chest and shoulders, with a face that had spent considerable time outdoors before it spent considerable time in fluorescent-lit corridors. He followed instructions carefully and documented everything, and had, over 9 years, developed a reasonably accurate instinct for situations that were about to become complicated. The situation with the contract nurse had been giving him that instinct for most of the afternoon. Carter had come to him at 4:22 with a printed copy of the badge revocation order, signed by Kingsley and countersigned by the HR director, and told him that the order was effective immediately, not end of shift. Floyd took the paperwork, confirmed the authorization signatures, and went to find the nurse in question. He located her at 4:31 in the documentation office adjacent to the medication room, where she was completing chart entries with the same economical precision she seemed to bring to every physical task he had observed her performing. He had been watching her more carefully than most people realized, because that was his job, and what he had observed had produced in him a sustained low-grade puzzlement that he hadn't been able to fully articulate to himself. He knocked on the open door. "Ms. Dahlia?" She looked up. "I need to collect your access badge. Mr. Kingsley has moved up the timeline on the review process." He held up the paperwork. "It's all documented. You'll receive a formal written notice through the contract agency." Dahlia set down her pen. She reached for her badge, the rectangular plastic card on a retractable lanyard, and stopped. "I need to complete these 3 charts," she said. "It's a patient care documentation requirement. Incomplete records are a regulatory violation." Floyd considered this. It was technically accurate, and Floyd did not like regulatory violations in his building because they generated paperwork that eventually ended up associated with security administration. "How long?" 7 minutes. He looked at his watch. He stepped inside the doorway and stood there, which was as close to waiting patiently as his job description allowed. Dahlia picked up her pen. The 7 minutes passed. She completed the charts in 6.5 and placed them in the outgoing tray with the same careful alignment she applied to everything. She unclipped her badge from her lanyard and held it out. Floyd took it, confirmed the information on the face matched the revocation paperwork, and placed it in his evidence bag. "You'll need to exit the building through the main entrance," he said. "I'll walk you out." "All right," she said, and stood. What happened next was not planned. This was important to understand later when people reconstructed the sequence of events in the way that witnesses always do, with the retrospective certainty that every moment had been building toward a conclusion that felt, in hindsight, inevitable. The truth was simpler and more contingent. Floyd placed his hand on Dahlia's shoulder to guide her toward the door, the practiced professional gesture of someone who escorts people out of buildings for a living. And he applied slightly more pressure than he intended, because the doorway was narrow, and he was large, and she was not moving quite as fast as he expected. The pressure on her shoulder twisted the fabric of her scrub top. The left side of the collar pulled down, and to the right. It exposed approximately 3 inches of her right shoulder, the curve where the deltoid meets the trapezius, and the edge of a marking that existed, until that moment, under every layer of her professional disguise. The marking was not decorative. It was geometric and precise, a series of concentric shapes with embedded lines, and a small dense symbol at its center that would mean nothing to most people in the world, but meant something very specific to the people who had been briefed on it. A unit designation, an operational classification. The kind of mark that certain people, in certain roles, carried to identify themselves to each other in circumstances where verbal identification was not possible. Floyd didn't recognize it. He saw it, registered it as a tattoo, and continued moving. Iris, standing in the hallway 6 feet away, because she had positioned herself in the hallway 6 feet away at 4:32 p.m. for reasons that she would later describe as professional oversight, saw it. Her expression did not change. Her breathing did not change. But she took her phone from her pocket and sent a message of 3 words to a contact saved under the name of a scheduling coordinator she had never actually spoken to. "Now, confirm arrival." The response came in under 40 seconds. ETA, 12 minutes. Iris put her phone away. She walked toward the nursing station at a pace that was entirely consistent with the rest of her afternoon. What she didn't know, what nobody in the hospital knew, was that Colonel Jasper Holt had received his database results at 3:58 p.m. and had been sitting in his car in the Mercy General parking lot for the past 37 minutes. The results had come back flagged at the highest classification level he had clearance to access, which meant that he could see enough to understand what he was looking at, but not enough to understand all of it. What he could see was a personnel record, partial, redacted in the specific way that records are redacted when the person is not dead, but is supposed to appear unavailable, with a service history that began at Fort Carson in 2014, ran through 2 classified operational deployments, and ended with a notation he had seen once before in his career on a document he had not been supposed to read. Deep cover placement, duration, classified, contact protocol, Bravo 7. Below that, a photo. Standard military ID format, straight ahead, no expression. The woman in the photo had dark hair and dark eyes and a quality of stillness that the camera had managed, somehow, to capture accurately. Jasper had looked at the photo for a long time. Then he had called the base intelligence office and reported his location and his observation. And the base intelligence officer had said something brief. And then the call had been transferred up in a way that happened very rarely in Jasper's experience, and the person on the other end of the transfer had said 4 words: "Stay where you are." He had been staying where he was for 37 minutes. At 4:43 p.m., he saw Floyd walking Dahlia toward the main entrance, and he got out of his car. The main entrance of Mercy General had, at 4:43 p.m. on a Tuesday in October, approximately 16 people in it. Visitors arriving and departing, 2 orderlies with a wheelchair, a woman at the reception desk, a maintenance worker near the automatic doors, Seth Pryor at a chair near the entrance with his recorder running and his notebook open, and Fiona, who had been sitting in the lobby for the past hour reviewing documents on her tablet after excusing herself from Kingsley's 4th-floor meeting with the stated intention of making calls. Fiona had, in fact, been making calls, just not the ones Kingsley expected. Floyd walked Dahlia through the lobby toward the main doors. The lobby watched in the incurious way that lobbies watch things, peripherally, without full investment. Fiona looked up, Seth looked up, the receptionist looked up and then back down at her screen. Kingsley came through the interior corridor at 4:44, Blaine beside him, Carter a step behind. He had come down to ensure the removal was properly witnessed and to say something to the investors, who he had not expected to still be in the lobby, about administrative efficiency and the challenges of managing contract staff. "Good," he said when he saw Floyd walking Dahlia toward the exit. He addressed this to Blaine and to no one in particular, in the tone of someone checking an item off a list. Dahlia stopped. She stopped not because Floyd stopped, but because she turned, a single, deliberate pivot on her left foot, and looked at Kingsley directly, the way she had not, at any point in the past 6 weeks, looked at anyone she was supposed to be invisible to. Kingsley looked back. He was expecting the face of someone diminished, a contract worker who had lost her job, who was being walked out of a building, who had been slapped in front of 23 witnesses this morning and had done nothing. He was expecting a confirmation of the order of things as he understood them to be. What he saw instead was something that took him a moment to process, because it didn't fit the template. Her face was calm, not resigned. Calm. There is a difference. Resigned is when you have stopped fighting. Calm is when you are finished needing to. "Mr. Kingsley," she said. Her voice was the same quiet register it had been all day. "I'd like you to stay in the building." He blinked. "I beg your pardon? I'm asking you not to leave." She held his gaze. "I'm asking nicely." The lobby had gone still in the way that spaces go still when the temperature of a situation changes and everyone present registers the change before they can identify it. Kingsley looked at Floyd. Floyd was looking at Dahlia with an expression that had shifted from professional neutrality toward something more alert. "Floyd," Kingsley said, "please escort." The sound arrived first. A distant thudding that built rapidly, the heavy, rhythmic percussion of rotor blades at low altitude, growing from background noise to something you felt in your chest before it was fully audible. The automatic doors of the main entrance slid open, and through them came the sound at full volume, and through the glass wall of the lobby entrance they could all see it, a UH-60 Blackhawk in military livery, descending toward the hospital parking lot at an angle that was not casual and not accidental. It touched down in the far section of the parking lot at 4:46 p.m. The rotors slowed, but did not stop. The door opened. Chuan Tung Raymond stepped out. He was in full uniform, Class A, not field dress, which told anyone who understood military protocol exactly what this visit was. You wore Class A when you were making a formal statement. 2 military police personnel followed him, and behind them 2 individuals in civilian suits who carried themselves with the particular contained authority of people who worked for agencies that preferred not to advertise their names. The lobby watched through the glass in absolute silence. Raymond walked across the parking lot toward the main entrance with the measured pace of a man who has never once hurried toward anything that wasn't on fire. He was 62, lean, with close-cropped gray hair, and the kind of face that had been looked at by a lot of people in difficult moments and had never offered them anything except clarity. He came through the main entrance. He stopped 3 feet inside the doors. He looked at the lobby. He looked at Floyd. He looked at Blaine. He looked at Kingsley. And then he looked at Dahlia. He brought his right hand to his forehead in a salute that was not the casual two-finger gesture of a man acknowledging a subordinate, but the full, formal, held position salute of a senior officer honoring someone to whom honor is owed. He held it for 3 full seconds. "Major," he said, "mission accomplished." The lobby made no sound at all. Dahlia returned the salute. Precise, correct, unhurried. And then something happened that nobody in the lobby, not Kingsley, not Blaine, not Seth, not Fiona, not Floyd, not Carter, not Holly, who had come into the corridor behind the charge desk and could see through the glass partition, had been prepared for. The fabric of Dahlia's scrub top, still displaced from Floyd's earlier contact at the shoulder, shifted slightly as she raised her arm. The right shoulder was visible. The tattoo, the marking, the symbol that Jasper Holt had been trying to confirm for the past 3 hours, fully exposed under the lobby lighting. Colonel Jasper Holt, who had come through the main entrance 30 seconds ahead of Raymond and had been standing near the reception desk, looked at it. His right hand came up. Not quite a salute, something more involuntary than that, the beginning of a physical response that his body initiated before his command gave the order. "Go scalpel," he said, and his voice came out rougher than he probably intended. "Fort Carson, 2014 through 2019. He looked at Raymond, then back at Dahlia. He stopped, recovered. "I saw the unit briefing materials, before Yemen." "I know," Dahlia said. "You were in the rotation. We were told—" He stopped again. "I know what you were told," she said, quietly. No accusation in it. The lobby had the quality of a room in which everyone has stopped breathing by agreement. Floyd was looking at his hand, the hand that had touched her shoulder, that had applied the pressure that had displaced the fabric, with an expression that was not quite horror and not quite shame, but was in the territory between them. Fiona had set her tablet face down on her chair without looking at it. Her eyes were on Dahlia. She was running calculations, visible on her face, the way financial calculations sometimes are on people who think in numbers, and the calculation she was running was arriving at a conclusion that would take several phone calls to fully process. Seth had his recorder in his hand. He had turned it on without deciding to. Kingsley had not moved. His face had undergone a series of transitions in the past 45 seconds, the particular visible process of a man whose understanding of his own situation is being revised in real time at a speed he cannot control. He looked at the soldiers. He looked at the 2 people in civilian suits. He looked at Dahlia. He sat down, not in a chair. He simply sat down on the edge of the reception desk because his legs had made a unilateral decision, and nobody stopped him because everyone in the room was occupied with their own version of the same recalibration. 18 months, Dahlia said. The lobby listened. $412 million in fraudulent defense procurement contracts. Stratford Medical Systems falsified adverse event reporting, 11 deaths classified as unrelated complications in facilities that share sourcing agreements with this hospital. She looked at Kingsley steadily. And the original whistleblower, a purchasing administrator named Gloria Reyes, who submitted an internal complaint 14 months ago, whose contract was terminated 48 hours after she filed it, whose subsequent job applications were systematically blacklisted through your HR network. Kingsley's mouth opened, closed. "I have 18 hours of recorded material," Dahlia said. 18 hours, starting 6 weeks ago and ending— She checked her watch. 11 minutes ago. From her inner pocket, she produced the recording device, small, rectangular, the size of a thumb drive, and placed it on the reception desk with a precise, unhurried movement. Raymond looked at the device, then at Kingsley, then at the 2 people in civilian suits who moved forward without being told. The next 20 minutes were, in the clinical sense, efficient. Levi, the hospital's legal counsel, arrived from the elevator at 4:52 p.m., took in the scene. Raymond's uniform, the MPs, the civilian investigators, Kingsley at the edge of the reception desk with the face of a man trying to find a version of this that still worked, and quietly asked one of the investigators whether his client had a right to counsel before any questioning. The investigator told him that was a very reasonable question, and that the answer was yes, and that the questioning would occur at a federal facility rather than a hospital lobby, and that he was welcome to accompany his client. Levi looked at Kingsley. Then he looked at the recording device on the reception desk. He closed his briefcase and said he would meet them there. The MPs approached Kingsley. The procedure was quiet and without theater. The restraints applied with professional brevity, the required language spoken at standard volume, the exit route through the lobby's side door arranged in advance. Kingsley walked. He didn't speak. The man who had filled rooms with the sound of his own authority all morning left through a side door in silence, and the lobby watched him go. Blaine had been standing very still against the wall near the corridor entrance for the past 4 minutes. One of the civilian investigators approached him with a card and told him that his cooperation was expected and would be documented and that his legal counsel should be contacted immediately. Blaine took the card with both hands, which were not entirely steady. Carter had disappeared. Nobody noticed immediately. When Floyd went to find him at 5:03 p.m., Carter was in the third-floor supply room, which he had accessed with his remaining badge credentials, apparently attempting to reach a cabinet that had already been emptied of what he was looking for. The MPs collected him without incident. Floyd came back to the lobby at 5:18 p.m. He found Dahlia near the main entrance, alone, standing with her hands at her sides, looking at nothing in particular. The lobby had mostly cleared. The civilians who had witnessed the events had been redirected or had left of their own accord. The investigators were managing the administrative transition in Kingsley's former office above. Raymond was in conference with Jasper in the room that had been the board of directors' waiting area. Floyd stopped in front of her. He was a large man and the lobby was spacious, and he still managed to look slightly smaller than he had an hour ago. "I didn't know," he said. "I know you didn't," she said. He stopped, looked at his hands. "When I put my hand on your shoulder, I shouldn't have done that regardless of—" "Floyd," her voice was even, not forgiving, exactly. Forgiveness implied a debt, and she wasn't in the business of debt. More like the acknowledgement of a fact. You followed documented orders and you did your job as you understood it. That's what you were supposed to do. He looked at her for a moment. "What do I do now?" "You'll be asked to give a statement," she said. "Tell them exactly what happened, in sequence, without editorializing. You'll be fine." He nodded. He started to leave, then stopped. "The investors," he said. "The woman, Fiona. She's been on her phone in the conference room for the past hour." "I know." "You know? She's the one who flagged the Stratford documentation to begin with," Dahlia said. "She came in with her own suspicions. That's partly why the timeline moved up." Floyd looked at her for a moment with the expression of someone reassessing the last 6 weeks from a new elevation. "You knew she was going to do that." "I thought she might," Dahlia said. "People who ask about adverse event rates are usually asking for a reason." He left. Dahlia looked out through the glass main entrance at the parking lot, where the Blackhawk sat with its rotors at idle in the October afternoon light. Ship was Dr. Norbert Chase, head of surgical services, was escorted to a small conference room on the second floor at 5:27 p.m. by one of Raymond's aides, who explained with courteous precision that a senior Department of Defense official would like to speak with him regarding the hospital's surgical outcomes data and its relationship to the Stratford procurement contract. Norbert was 68 years old and had been practicing surgery for 34 years, and had, in that time, learned to project an authority so complete and so consistent that he had largely forgotten, somewhere in the middle of his career, that it was a projection. He sat down across from Raymond with his hands on the table and his spine straight, and the expression of a man who was prepared to explain, at whatever length was required, why what he had done was reasonable. Raymond placed a printed document on the table between them. It was a list: dates, patient names, procedure codes, outcome classifications. "These," Raymond said, "are 11 patients. 8 of them were treated with Stratford hemodynamic monitoring equipment at this facility between January 2022 and March 2024. 3 of them were treated at affiliate facilities. The adverse events in each case were classified as complications unrelated to equipment failure." He paused. This classification was incorrect in 9 of the 11 cases. Norbert looked at the document. His posture didn't change. His face changed, slowly, in the way that faces change when a person is trying to manage a recognition they had not expected to have to manage today. "The incorrect classification," Raymond continued, "appears on documentation that carries your signature." Norbert said nothing for a long moment. Then, "I'll need to speak with my attorney." "That's a very reasonable position," Raymond said. "We'll arrange it." He stood and left the conference room. In the hallway outside, he paused for a moment. and then continued toward the elevator with the expression of someone who has done this particular kind of work long enough to find neither satisfaction nor enjoyment in it, only the steady forward motion of necessity. Aaron found Dahlia at 5:41 p.m. in the emergency department. She had come back in. She had building access now, or rather, the restriction on her access had been dissolved in the 45 minutes since Kingsley's removal, along with a considerable number of other things Kingsley had authorized. And she was doing something unexpected. She was finishing the patient documentation she had been interrupted from completing when Floyd came to escort her out. The charts she had started at 4:31. She was completing them. Aaron stood in the doorway of the documentation office and watched her write for a moment. She wrote with the same compressed, efficient handwriting. Every character formed precisely. No wasted motion. "The private from the military transport," he said. "The bilateral pulmonary contusion," she continued writing. "He'll need the follow-up CT at 48 hours. Don't let the surgical team sign off on the chest clearance based on the initial scan." "I flagged it? Good." He was quiet for a moment. "Blast over pressure pattern," he said. "That's not in the civilian emergency medicine curriculum." "No," she said. "It's not. Where does someone learn to identify it?" She set down her pen and looked up at him. He was 29 and earnest, and had spent the past 4 months in a state of perpetual mild overwhelm, trying to become competent faster than the clinical environment was willing to slow down for him, and he had spent most of today doing something that was harder than competence. He had taken direction from an unexpected source, without fully understanding the source in real time, under pressure. That was a different skill. Most people had to fail several times before they learned it. "Kandahar," she said, 2017. She picked up her pen. "It was a difficult year." He was quiet for a moment. "I'm sorry," he said, "that you had to. I mean, all of it." "Don't be sorry," she said. "You did good work today." He looked like he wanted to say something else. He looked like there were approximately 47 more questions he wanted to ask. Instead, he said, "Thank you," in the voice of someone who means it across multiple meanings at once. She nodded. He left. She finished the chart, set it in the outgoing tray, and went to find Ezra. Babasund Ezra was being discharged. His nephew, a broad, quiet man in his 30s named Marcus, had arrived at 5:15 to take him home before his surgery the next morning, and the two of them were in the process of gathering Ezra's things with the particular methodical slowness of people who have had a lot of practice at hospital departures. The roommate with the game shows was absent for once. Dahlia appeared in the doorway. Ezra looked up. He looked at her for a moment, at her badge, now gone, at her navy scrubs, at the particular quality of her face in the late afternoon light through the window. And then he looked at the door behind her, where the distant sound of a military helicopter's idle rotors was still faintly audible. "Figured that was connected to you somehow," he said. "Most things today were," she said. Marcus looked between them, made the rapid social calculation of a man who understood that he was standing in a conversation that did not require him, and found a reason to be in the hallway. Ezra held out his hand. She took it. He held it for a moment. Not the grip of someone who wanted something, but the hold of someone who was placing something in her palm that had no physical weight. "My field doc," he said, 1968. I never knew his name, never saw his face after that night, but I knew what he did. He looked at her hand in his. "Some things you just know." "Yes," she said. "You did good here." He said it the way veterans say things, stripped of decoration, offered as fact. "Whatever you were actually doing, you did good." She squeezed his hand once and released it. She started to step back. "Doc," he said. She paused. "Don't let them put you somewhere quiet for too long. People like you, the world needs you moving." She looked at him for a moment with an expression that was not quite a smile, and not quite something else, but was in the territory between. Then she stepped back from the doorway and was gone. Ezra lowered his hand to the bed. He looked at the window. After a while, Marcus came back in and picked up the overnight bag, and Ezra stood carefully and followed his nephew toward the elevator without looking back. In the parking lot at 6:02 p.m., Caleb was leaning against the side of his car with his arms crossed and his face tilted toward the sky in the way of someone who is not looking at anything but is aware of everything. He heard Dahlia's footsteps before he saw her. "You knew from day one," she said. It wasn't an accusation. "Third day," he said. "You carried a medication tray up 3 flights of stairs instead of taking the service elevator. muscle distribution in your forearms, and the way you looked at the exit routes every time you entered a new room. He glanced at her. Old habit. Same. How long were you Bravo Mike? 7 years. 1 deployment, 2 long cover assignments. She looked at the helicopter. You? 8 years, before the knee went. He said it without self-pity, the way you'd say any fact about weather or geography. What I do now is what I can still do well. So, he shrugged, the patients here aren't nothing. No, she said. They're not. He was quiet for a moment. Then, the kid today, Aaron. He's good, she said. Yeah. Caleb looked at his shoes. He's green, but he's good. He takes direction without making it about him. That's harder than most people think. I know. You could have told him where you learned what you learned, in general terms. He'll figure it out, she said. The good ones always do. Caleb unfolded his arms and held out his hand. The handshake he offered was not a civilian handshake. It was the specific grip of people who have operated in the same vocabulary without ever meeting. She returned it exactly. Wherever they're sending you next, he said. Yeah, she said. He got in his car. She stood in the parking lot and watched him pull out, and then she turned back toward the building. Holly was waiting near the main entrance. She had been waiting for approximately 20 minutes, standing slightly to the side of the door, in the way of someone who isn't sure whether they're supposed to be there, holding a hospital-issue coffee cup with both hands, as if it were providing warmth on a night that wasn't cold. I wanted to, she started, and then stopped, because she had rehearsed this, and the rehearsed version suddenly seemed insufficient. I'm sorry. About this afternoon, when Carter said, You don't need to apologize, Dahlia said. I believed him. For about 40 minutes, I believed him. Holly looked at the cup. I should have trusted what I actually saw. What you saw was confusing, Dahlia said. That was by design. Still, Holly looked up. I shouldn't have let one person's story override everything I'd already observed. Dahlia looked at her. Remember that, she said, not as a lesson about today, as a practice. Trust what you observe. Go back to the direct evidence before you accept the narrative. She paused. That's good medicine, and it's good thinking. Holly absorbed this. Then, the generals. Is there a unit that... I'm asking whether... She stopped, took a breath. I'm asking whether the kind of work you do is something that can be applied for. Dahlia looked at her for a long moment. How old are you? 24. How long have you been a nurse? 11 months. Dahlia considered. Spend 3 more years here, she said. Get your trauma certification. Build the clinical base until it's reflex, not recall. And... She glanced toward where Raymond had been. Ask the general that question directly. He's still in the building. Holly blinked. I should just walk up to a general and ask? If you can't do that, Dahlia said, you can't do the job. Holly looked at the door. About. Then she squared her shoulders slightly, a small, unconscious adjustment towards something straighter, and went back inside. Dahlia watched her go. If this story got you, if you felt every single second of what just happened in that parking lot, drop a comment below. Tell us, did you see the twist coming? Share this with someone who needs to hear it today. And stay with us through the ending, because the final 60 seconds are going to leave you with a question that'll keep you up tonight. Raymond was in the former board waiting area with Jasper and Iris and 2 of his aides, working through the procedural handoff with the efficiency of someone who does not leave logistics to chance. When Dahlia came in, the room rearranged itself around her arrival in the specific way that rooms do when someone of operational significance enters. Not deference exactly, but a reorientation of attention. Raymond looked at her. The recording device has been handed to the JAG investigators, he said. They're requesting a formal debrief at the base at 0700 hours tomorrow. Understood? Fiona. He glanced at one of his aides. Has already provided a separate statement to the civilian investigators regarding the Stratford documentation. Her fund is initiating a full audit of the procurement chain. He paused. The adverse event discrepancy you identified, the gap between 3 and 11 cases, and that's the thread that opens the wider contract fraud investigation. Gloria Reyes, Dahlia said. We have her contact information. She'll be notified tonight. Iris, who had been standing near the window with her hands clasped, and the expression of someone who has been holding a considerable amount of information in place for a very long time, exhaled slowly. The board is meeting tomorrow morning, she said. Emergency session. I've been asked to serve as interim administrator pending the full review. She looked at Dahlia. I'm going to need the full documentation protocol for everything you flagged in the last 6 weeks. It's in the device, Dahlia said, and there's a duplicate set in the secure file that your contact at the base intelligence office already has access to. She looked at Iris steadily. You know what to do with it. I do, Iris said. Raymond reached into the breast pocket of his uniform and produced a folded document, a single page, sealed with a classification marking that most people in the room were not cleared to read. He held it out. Dahlia took it, unfolded it, read it. She refolded it and put it in her pocket. Thank you, sir. Major. He held out his hand. The handshake he offered had in it the specific weight of a senior officer who has sent people into difficult places and received them back, and knows in the way that only experience can teach the difference between what those people look like going in and what they look like coming out, and why the gap between the two deserves acknowledgement. The mission required everything you gave it. It usually does, she said. Jasper stepped forward. He held out his hand, and his handshake had in it something slightly different. Something older, the recognition of one long-service soldier for another, across the specific distance of rank, and the specific closeness of shared experience. Fort Carson still talks about Kandahar, he said. People who were there. They don't use your name because they don't know your name, but they know the story. It was the job, she said. It was more than the job. He held her gaze. You know it was. She said nothing, but she didn't disagree. At 6:47 p.m., Fiona came out of the conference room where she had been on the phone for the past 90 minutes. She looked slightly older than she had at 9 a.m., the particular aging of a hard afternoon, but her eyes were clear and her posture was intact. She found Dahlia in the corridor and stopped in front of her. The procurement chain, Fiona said. The adverse event data. I had fragments. My fund had flagged Stratford as a marginal investment 2 years ago based on the recall documentation. I came in today thinking I might find confirmation of what I already suspected about their product liability exposure. She paused. I didn't think I'd find this. You asked the right questions, Dahlia said. That's what started the clock. Fiona was quiet for a moment. Gloria Reyes, she said, the purchasing administrator. Yes, I want to know what she's doing now, and whether she needs support. She looked at Dahlia directly. Not institutional support, personal. Dahlia held her gaze. I'll pass that along. Fiona nodded once. She went back toward the exit. At the door, she paused without turning around. Whoever authorized what you did here, she said, made the right call, and walked out. At 7:03 p.m., Seth Pryor sat in his car in the hospital parking lot, with his recorder on the passenger seat and his notebook on his knees, and several pages of handwritten notes that were going to require careful consideration before they became anything publishable. He had the fraud story, the Stratford contract data, the adverse event discrepancy, the procurement chain. Caleb had pointed him there, and Fiona's statements to the civilian investigators had confirmed the outline, and he had enough to build a solid, documented piece that would stand up to the kind of scrutiny that serious institutional fraud stories attracted. He did not have the nurse. She had not given him her name. She had not spoken to him directly. She had not looked at him in the lobby with anything other than the same level, unremarkable attention she had directed at everything around her all day. He had watched her receive a general salute and return it without drama, watched her speak to Kingsley in the lobby with the flat, certain authority of someone reading a verdict, watched her hand a recording device to federal investigators, and accept a commendation document and exchange the handshake of equals with a 2-star general, all with an expression that never departed from its baseline of focused calm. He had no story about her. He had an impression. The impression was that the woman who had been slapped in the face in the emergency department at 7:42 that morning had known, at the moment it happened, exactly what the day was going to cost and exactly what it was going to produce, and had weighed those things and proceeded. He wrote in his notebook, "Some people carry their service the way others carry an illness, invisibly, constantly, shaping everything about how they move through the world." He looked at it, crossed it out. He wasn't a person who wrote in metaphors. He stuck to facts. The fact was, this hospital was about to change. The fact was, the people responsible for the harm done here, to patients, to a whistleblower, to everyone whose care had been compromised by fraudulent equipment and falsified data, were going to answer for it. The fact was, one woman with a recording device and 6 weeks of patience had made that possible. He picked up his recorder, turned it off, drove home. At 7:22 p.m., the hospital's evening shift was well underway. The day's events had produced the specific kind of institutional turbulence that settles into a buzzing, uncertain quiet. People doing their jobs with greater care than usual, conversations conducted at slightly lower volume, the particular atmosphere of a building that has been shaken and is now finding its level again. The emergency department was running clean. Aaron was on his second patient of the evening shift, a chest pain presentation that he was working through methodically, flag by flag, in the way he had watched someone else work through 5 critical cases that morning. Holly was at the medication cart with the expression of someone who is paying more attention than usual, which she would maintain for the rest of her shift and, with some variation, for the rest of her career. Caleb had finished his documentation and clocked out and driven home, where he would spend a quiet evening, not telling his wife any of the specifics of what had happened today, which was not unusual. And she would watch him be quieter than normal and understand without asking that it was the good kind of quiet. On the 4th floor, Ezra's room had a new occupant, a 40-year-old with a broken radius from a construction accident, who found the television remote immediately and turned it to a news channel. The game show roommate was getting discharged the following morning. Shock. Dahlia was in the women's locker room at 7:31 p.m. She opened her locker, the narrow metal rectangle that had held for 6 weeks only what a contract nurse needed to hold: a change of street clothes, a small bag of personal items, a lock she had brought from outside because the hospital-issued locks were flimsy. She changed out of her scrubs without hurrying. She folded them and placed them on the bench. She took the nurse's badge off the hook where she had placed it. Carter had handed it back to her at 5:47 p.m. as part of the access restoration process, and she had accepted it without comment and set it flat on the bench beside the folded scrubs. She looked at it for a moment. 6 weeks of what it represented. The weight of being invisible when you were not invisible. The weight of being dismissed when you were not dismissible. The particular discipline of remaining exactly as small as the situation required while carrying something much larger. She put on her street clothes, plain, dark, the same calibrated ordinariness she applied to every choice she made in cover. She slung her bag over her shoulder. The secure phone in her pocket vibrated. She took it out. Bravo 7, active, coordinates follow, report in 36 hours. Below the text, a set of coordinates that she memorized in approximately 4 seconds and then confirmed against the reference point she kept stored in a different part of her memory. The way you keep emergency routes stored, accessed rarely, never lost. She deleted the message, pocketed the phone. She looked at the locker one more time, closed it, did not look back. Holly intercepted her at the corridor junction between the locker room and the main exit. She had clearly been waiting, and the expression on her face had the quality of someone who has spent the past 40 minutes working up to something and is going to do it before the opportunity closes. "I asked him," she said. Dahlia stopped. "You asked the general." I walked into the room where he was finishing up, and I said, "Sir, I have a question about career paths in military medicine." And then I asked. Holly looked slightly stunned at herself. He said, she stopped. He said I should speak to someone at the Army Medical Department recruiting office, and he gave me a card. And then he said, "The woman you're asking about will tell you the same thing I just did. She always tells people the right thing." And then he went back to his meeting. Dahlia looked at her. "Good," she said. "That's it? Just good? You did the hard part. The rest is logistics." Holly looked at her. The plain clothes, the bag, the complete absence of the badge that had been her institutional identity for 6 weeks. "You're leaving? Yes? Now? Yes." Holly opened her mouth, closed it, opened it again. "Is there anything I can—" "Take the trauma certification course," Dahlia said. "The one at Mercy General's partner institution. It runs in February and April. The April session is better. Different instructor, more clinical hours." She looked at Holly steadily. "And trust what you observe. We already covered that." "We did," Holly said. "I haven't forgotten." Dahlia walked past her toward the main exit. At the door, she paused. She didn't turn around. She said, at standard volume, "You're going to be good at it, whichever version you choose." Then she went through the door. Btch. The parking lot was quieter than it had been. The Black Hawk was still there. Rotors now stopped, the crew conducting post-mission checks in the evening chill. The parking lot lights had come on in the early dark of October, throwing yellow circles on the asphalt, and the hospital's main entrance behind her was lit and operational and already, somehow, different in the quality that buildings acquire when the thing that was wrong in them has been named. Raymond was standing near the helicopter, finishing a call. He saw her coming and finished the call. "The debrief is 0700, he said. "I'll be there." He looked at her for a moment, the assessment of a commanding officer who is trying to be honest with himself about what he is seeing. "How are you?" he said. It was not a perfunctory question. He asked it in the specific way of people who have sent others into sustained difficulty and want to know, need to know, what came back. She considered it the way she considered everything, accurately. "Ready for what's next?" she said. "That's not what I asked." She looked at him. "I know." He held her gaze. "The mission required 6 weeks of sustained cover in a high-exposure, institutional environment," he said. "That's a specific kind of sustained effort. It has effects." "Yes," she said. And I know what the effects are," she said. "And I know how to manage them. And I will." She paused. "The next mission is 36 hours out." He looked at her for a long moment. Then he nodded, once, in the particular way of a senior officer who trusts his people to know themselves and also watches them carefully for the moments when self-knowledge fails. "The debrief will include a medical evaluation," he said. "Standard protocol. I know the protocol." "Good." He held out his hand one more time. This handshake was slightly different from the earlier one. Shorter, more private, less formal. The handshake of a commanding officer who is also in some carefully maintained compartment of professional life, someone who has observed this particular person long enough to have developed something adjacent to concern. 36 hours, Major." "Yes, sir." She walked to the far end of the parking lot. She had a car there, a rental, nondescript, registered under a name associated with her cover identity, which would be returned to the agency and closed out through standard administrative channels. She unlocked it, put her bag in the back, got in. She sat for a moment with her hands on the wheel. Not collecting herself, she was already collected, but in the specific pause of someone moving between one state and the next, acknowledging the transition before crossing it. Then she put the car in drive and pulled out of the parking lot of Mercy General Medical Center without looking back at it, and the hospital disappeared in her rearview mirror as she turned onto the main road, and the October evening closed around the ordinary dark of a drive towards something that had not started yet. Sec at 9:44 p.m., Colonel Jasper Holt sat at his desk at Fort Carlisle. On his monitor was a file. The classification header was red and carried the code he had been authorized to access since the base intelligence officer had upgraded his clearance level at 1700 hours. The file was not long. Classification documents rarely are. They carry only what is necessary and no more. Subject, Dahlia. JSOC personnel record. Partially declassified for operational review. Service history, Fort Carson, 2014 through 2019. Combat deployment, 2 operational theaters. Long cover assignment, duration classified. Operational designation, Ghost Scalpel. Specialization. Combat surgical medicine, intelligence integration, extended undercover placement. Commendations. 3. 2 classified, 1 partially visible. A notation beside a date in 2017 that read, Kandahar Province, Sector 7. Extraction under direct fire conditions. Personnel recovered, 9. Personnel lost, 0. Personal injuries sustained. 3. Return to active status at own insistence within 48 hours. Below that, a photo, the same one he had looked at in the parking lot that afternoon. He looked at it now, in his office, in the quiet of a military base at night, with the particular quality of attention that soldiers give to the faces of people who have done the things that most people cannot imagine doing, and have continued afterward to get up and do the next thing. He closed the file. He looked at his window, the dark outside, the light reflecting back, the base grounds beyond. Somewhere on a road, somewhere in this state, a rental car was driving toward a motel or a safe house or an airport. And in it was a person who had spent 6 weeks being nothing in order to stop something, and who would spend 36 hours resting before becoming nothing again somewhere else. He turned off the desk lamp, sat in the dark for a moment, Then he reached for his phone and called his wife. And when she asked him how his day had been, he said, "Long," which was true, and "good," which was also true, and left it at that. At that same hour, in the back of his nephew's car on the highway heading home, Ezra was awake. Marcus had the radio on low, something gentle, instrumental. The lights of the city moved past the windows. Ezra's knee ached in the specific way that old injuries ache in the cold, the body's own record-keeping. He was thinking about the field doc from 1968. He was thinking about what it meant that some people chose repeatedly the kind of work that put them between harm and people who couldn't protect themselves from it. Not because they had to, because when they looked at the world and calculated what it needed and in what they could give, the calculation kept coming out the same way. He looked at the highway lights moving past. There are soldiers who never truly leave the field, he thought. They just change what they're wearing. He said it out loud, quietly, to nobody in particular. Marcus glanced in the rearview mirror. "You say something, Uncle Ezra?" "Nothing," Ezra said. "Just thinking." He looked back at the lights. After a while, he closed his eyes. His knee ached, and the radio played something low and steady. And somewhere on a different road, moving in a different direction, a person who had gone 6 weeks without being called by her real name or her real rank or her real designation was driving through the same October night, carrying the same October dark, already thinking about the next thing that needed doing. Exactly the way she always had, exactly the way she always would.